On that subject of being real, our next discussion is something that we haven't really touched on yet, and something that's not necessarily an elephant in the room, but has been mentioned in various different sessions, and we haven't really gone into detail. But don't you worry, we are about to go into detail in terms of what the new agency network looks like. Do agencies run media still? What is their role? We've got a great panel to discuss this, covering off all facets of the new media ecosystem, which is very exciting. It's also good to see that the winners from last night, PhD and Mediacom, are back in the room, which is wonderful. Only an hour and 20 minutes late, but that's good. They're here, which is wonderful. PhD did make it in before Mediacom, so that is good. They get some extra points there. Okay, so without further ado, let me introduce you to a moderator who is going to run this panel and this discussion, and is far more knowledgeable than me on this subject, and he is one of the most experienced global CMOs around the world. It is the one and only Andrew Warner. Good luck, sir.
And working. Can you hear me? There we go. So, what are we going to talk about today? Well, we're going to be talking about the role of agencies and do they still own advertising anymore? So, I guess what we're thinking about today is with the rise of management consultancies, with brands who are now increasingly going directly to tech giants, they're not only creating their own campaigns in-house, they're also starting to flight them too. So, how do the big agencies reinvent themselves? How are they going to cope with this landscape? Do they need to? And I guess there's been some topics, as Jeremy alluded to, which a lot of people have been talking about. The big issues around transparency, brand safety, these opaque black box technologies, they've been well debated in sessions around here, and we're not going to focus so much time on those today. But it is these very issues that have seen not just the rise of management consultancies in our space, but also a new breed of agencies emerging. Agencies who put transparency, data science at the very core of their offering, instead of perhaps those traditional pitches around trading power and cost-effective audience reach beyond all else. What's more, publishers, technology companies, ad tech vendors, even mobile phone operators like Telefonica are all starting to want a piece of this action, trying to muscle in on the space that traditionally was held by the holding companies. So I guess one could argue we could be entering a Darwinian period for our industry where not all of these players are going to survive. And in this agency Game of Thrones, it's the client who's going to decide the survival of the fittest. So, the stakes are high. There's a lot of money on the table. But luckily today, I've got some big game players who are going to come and start getting into this topic with me. So, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like you to give a big welcome for Nikki, Mendonca, Global President, Accenture Interactive Operations.
And I am wearing heels. I have to navigate this catwalk.
I'll give you a bit of time. Next up, representing the holding companies. We were talking about bravery. It's a brave man to come to this debate. Give him respect. Ladies and gentlemen, the CEO of Mediacom APAC, Mr. Mark Heap. Welcome.
Thank you.
Quite all right. Good to see you. You're very dapper. Right. I touched upon the fact that it's the client who gets to decide. We're going well. We're going Shell. You can be sure of Shell. Ladies and gentlemen, representing the client, the head of global media, Mr. Chris Hayek. Hi, Chris. Hi. All right, come on, let's go and sit down on these swivelly chairs. Let's hope we don't turn our backs on too many people. Oh, it's nice to sit down. So, thanks for joining me. You're all looking a bit nervous. Don't worry, I'll be nice.
I'm nervous about falling off.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's a bit precipitous, particularly after a night out. Anyway, I'm going to start with Nikki. So, Nikki, we talked a little bit there about the complexity of this category, with all of these different players now getting involved. Is it that very complexity and the fact that client businesses now are pretty confused about who they should turn to that's really leading to this rise of management consultancies playing a role as trusted advisors in a category which perhaps they haven't been preeminent in before?
Yeah, I think there's a huge combination of many things, really. And I think that a lot of clients, they need to be the disruptors and not the disrupted. And we're finding that there's a lot of panic in the boardroom. And even picking up on something that Michelle said earlier, marketing is at a pivotal point at the moment. And CMOs are under a huge amount of pressure to kind of prove their value to the business. And we're having a lot of conversations now with clients about sort of money in and money out. And you have to prove that you're marketing for growth. Marketing is a huge part of the growth agenda for a company. So with that panic in the boardroom, CMOs are looking for help.
Yeah.
And because they don't want to be blindsided by the next kind of Dollar Shave Club and D2C sort of operator. And the questions now are so much larger, bigger, more fundamental about actually how can you help us grow our company. And that's why I think Accenture are playing a bigger role in terms of just helping clients grow. That's
really interesting. I'm just going to pick up quickly on one point there. And Gemma touched on the previous conversation about marketing being bigger than marketing now. And I think it was Hugh Davidson who talked about marketing being too important to be left to the marketing department. I guess one of the things I'm sort of curious with the management consultancies is we've seen on the client side this sort of growth in chief customer officers and a merging of different disciplines where marketing, product budgets, managing end-to-end customer experiences have become very much on vogue. Is that another sort of area which Accenture's focusing on, this kind of whole area of cross-company digital transformation, not just working with marketing departments? Absolutely. We found that marketing transformation is now inextricably linked to business transformation. So obviously, the whole end-to-end customer experience is what we're trying to, the space that we're playing in. And what we're finding is, it's not optional to be a customer-centric company. Yeah. It's mandatory. Therefore, there's a huge kind of reorg at play in a lot of clients, and obviously we want to help with that. So marketing transformation can't be kind of hived off. Yeah. It is a fundamental part of business transformation now. Okay, cool. Mark, I'm going to turn to you. I'm not going to call you the villain of the pantomime here because you're a very nice man, I know, but the big media agencies, they've had a hard time recently. They've had a lot of criticism in the trade press, perhaps not all of it justified about some of these issues. It seems there's a lot of people who now want to come and eat your lunch. How are you going to make sure that you still have a place at the top table with these executives that Nikki's been talking about? Do you need to reinvent yourself, or is this a load of hype?
We need to continually reinvent ourselves. But I think that's been a challenge since the rise of the media agencies. I started off my career at a full-service agency at JWT, so I remember the days when media agencies started up, and I look back on that and think at the time it was because we were seen as the sort of basement dwellers. We were deeply unpopular then, and the media part of the business was a fraction of the creative agency model. So if you go back 20 years, we could have been sitting on this stage talking about what's the future of a media department. 20 years later, most of the media agencies are now contributing more growth and more profits, the holding companies, than the creative agencies. So I think there's a long culture of progressive thinking and reinvention at the agencies, and that will continue. We find that we're in one of the most interesting and dynamic times certainly of my career, but it's exciting, and how do we safeguard that future? It's by making sure that we contribute to our clients' businesses. So whether that's Accenture or Mediacom or any other service-related company, you've got to deliver value. And so understanding that clients need to deliver growth and focusing on how we can help them unlock that growth will always be our focus. How we do that and how we empower and enable our clients will continue to evolve, and the techniques and the way we work will always evolve. But we feel quite sure about our healthy future.
That's cool. I have to sort of pick up on it. I guess one of the things which and you touched on it there, that's kind of become clear, is within these big holding companies, it's the media agencies who are being tasked with carrying the commercial baton in many ways and have been contributing more to the revenues of these businesses. But we have seen, and we've talked about, a world where client marketing budgets are coming down. There's commercial pressures on these businesses. Do you think that holding companies have made some mistakes which they're paying for now with some of these issues that were in things like the A&A report, or do you think that's actually a bit of a red herring as an issue?
I don't think it's a red herring. I think that it's a really serious issue. And I think that the industry needs to embrace transparency. I think that there are some areas that can be, if you like, misleading. I think it's very easy for people to jump on sound bites and turn those into things that you can bang a drum around.
Yeah.
And people forget that, they talk about, viewability or, a lot of these issues are it's not necessarily that agencies or vendors are trying to hide things. It is that sometimes things haven't been possible.
Yeah.
And then, you look at traditional media, you still can't measure outdoor in most markets. There's a lot of countries where you still don't have print circulation. And so it is interesting when certain areas of what we do are held up to a certain level that isn't applied consistently. So I think the whole AANA report and what has been happening in similar bodies around the world is welcome. I think we all want to work in a more transparent way, and that will help us understand what's working more and unlock growth.
I'm going to come to you, Chris, in just one second. There's another thing which you touched on, which I'm really interested in personally, because we probably have a similar vintage with your talk about the media departments down in the basement, because I remember those days well. But do you think in a weird way it could actually be the very breadth of the offering that holding companies are able to provide that could actually end up being their strength? And we could see a return to full service with agencies acting as a single point of contact for overworked CMO? Or do you think we're going to see this process of disintermediation and fragmentation continue in the industry?
Honestly, I think it's horses for courses. I think that, I don't even have to say horizontality anymore now that Martin's not there. But, the whole implied benefit of a horizontal approach, whether that's at Publicis One or at WPP or Omnicom or wherever, of course there's benefits, because within a group where there's hundreds of companies, there's an enormous amount of talent. But it's down to, I say it's horses for courses, because it's really depends on the client, and it's of course their prerogative. Most clients will want different service areas. Some will choose to do that through a single point of contact, a single entry point, and they will want that service model. Others would rather choose what they consider best in class from across the industry. I don't think, I think it'd be very patronising of me to say that, all of a WPP solution is going to be the best solution in the industry. Yeah. Of course it's not. But I do think that there are service models out there that can certainly be competitive and offer value.
Okay, cool. Thanks for that, Chris. So, you're here to represent the client view. You've heard what these guys have got to say. Sounds like you've got a lot of choices to make. But I'm quite interested. The World Federation of Advertisers, David Weldon, CMO of RBS, someone I know quite well, I thought he made a very good point recently, which he said he wishes that client businesses would stop, as he put it, crapping on about transparency unless they're prepared to do something about it. And I think there was a slight inference that with some businesses, actually, the reason that they're crapping on about it is because it's a negotiation position. But at Shell, what are you doing? How are you thinking about this evolving landscape and some of these issues that we've been talking about?
Yeah, I think transparency is only one of them, and I think that's the biggest struggle with it. So the conversation this morning we're having on viewability, even on that piece alone, and what's sort of changed on digital, in my opinion, I think that because you have more metrics, more capabilities, I believe that traditional always had some of these issues. We just didn't know about it.
Yeah.
And I think now it's brought more light to it. It's brought more pressure from our EVPs to be able to look at these things. So we do work a lot with companies around looking at viewability and transparency, and we are now having conversations about the impact and effect of viewability on it. So one of the things we look at now is when we look at our metrics, we don't just measure the metrics, we're trying to figure out how we actually measure the impact. And I think that's one of the reasons you see budgets get slashed, is because everybody is showing performance metrics and nobody's really showing what the real impact it is. And that's always been the challenge on media that I've always gotten from people at Shell, is you need to tell me what the return is on this. And
do you have an issue with, or a perception issue perhaps, with sort of media agencies marking their own homework in that space?
I think that my general feeling is, if that's an issue, we've got bigger issues. But I do believe that in the corporate world, especially at a VP level, there is concerns about marking your own homework. So I think there's a little bit of that challenge, and that's why a lot of times we will bring in other people to look at it. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but I think sometimes you've got to look at where that trust is. And I always believe in trust and verify. So I think we've got to look at ways that we can enable these guys and not have the relationship that is, I don't believe you, but look and say, hey, show me this, and then I'll also look at other ways that I can potentially verify that. So the viewification and some of these elements, Group M has standards around that, so we now look and say, are those standards being held? And are we actually paying for that if those standards aren't being held? So just an example of how we have to trust and verify as part of that also.
Okay. One of the things I'm quite interested in is, we talked a little bit about the disruption on the agency side, but obviously, I mean, I've worked client side for a long time, as have you. One of the pressures on our business is we're all shit scared about being disrupted ourselves. We're seeing, you know, the resources that we buy to run our businesses are getting more expensive, they're getting scarcer, our margins are getting squeezed, our markets are getting more competitive, and ultimately we're looking, whether it's the likes of Uber or Airbnb or whoever, at these guys who are disrupting categories, and we've got an eye on that too, as have our CEOs. Who do you turn to for advice on these issues? Would you be more inclined towards a Nikki or a Mark? Is it a combination? What roles do these different vendors play?
Personal.
I think, you know, it's funny because I think this is one of the biggest things that keeps up our CEO and our EVP. Not just the disruption, but the fact is, if you look at disruption, is come from, if you take Uber as an example, if you take Dollar Shave Club, it's come from somebody who hasn't been in the category. So for P&G, who's been, well, actually Gillette, who's been selling razors for 100 years or so, we've been selling oil for 100 years. Taxi service has been around for 100 years. The biggest fear they have is digital. It's basically disruption is digital, and it's somebody outside the category. So the conversations we have is we need to think differently about it. And I think it is a little bit of both the combination of the consultants and our media agency. So I think there's two areas. One is, I think the conversation we have with the consultants is you can look at a very high level. Perhaps they have the ability to maybe catch a little bit of who's going to be disruptive in that area. And disruption always comes from where its strength comes from, is when you alleviate a pain point. And if you think of our category of changing motor oil as one of our businesses, that is a big pain point. So somebody might figure that out very much. But then you've got the everyday disruption as part of that, and that's where we have Mediacom as part of it. But the two have to work together. So if you look at that, one of the things with disruption is you have to test, learn faster, fail faster. We as an organization aren't really set to be doing that. So we have the speed and agility of an iceberg when we're Shell. So having somebody like Nikki come in and look at organizations and say, what does that mean, is one step. And then once we build that, how does that mirror into the Mediacom, on our side, the Mediacom world is part of that also, is critical, why both sides need to work together.
Cool, that makes a lot of sense. Nikki, I'm going to come back to you. Chris talked about Shell's been in business for over 100 years. And obviously, Accenture's a very reputable brand in the in the consulting world. You know, it's kind of, if you're a CEO, you don't get fired for hiring IBM, you don't get fired for hiring Accenture, you'd hope. Well, you will anyway. But these guys, I mean, the advertising agencies, I mean, used to work for a big network. They've got the people on the ground, they've got the experience, they've got the talent. Do you, as a consultancy, see you playing a different part in the ecosystem from the traditional agencies? Do you see that you can cover what they do plus something else? Where do you see your sort of part of the Venn diagram, if you like, within the industry?
Yeah, well, as sort of Chris alluded to, I think that we're helping to answer bigger questions, and then those bigger questions and answers cascade into, you know, bigger fundamental solutions and cascade into marketing and then into advertising. You know, let's remember advertising is a subset of marketing. so yes, big answers to bigger questions. I think that Accenture, I mean, a lot of people don't know that Accenture is nearly 450,000 people. So, you're talking about a massive organization, a huge scale. And I think that scale lends itself to really being able to harness very powerful assets and capabilities around the problems that a client has. I mean, we've got about 4,000 data scientists who work on, 175 global clients. I mean, the scale is unbelievable. And I think that also integration of any kind of marketing activation is now mandatory, paid, owned and earned, blurred. Marketing technology is sort of accelerating convergence. So I think that marketers want to have fully integrated solutions, and we feel like, we can harness our assets and capabilities to be able to bring those integrated marketing solutions to clients. So I think it's the scale. The scale is on another level, I would say, versus some of the holding companies.
Do you think they've still got the same depth of specialism, for example, though? A media agency, they, as you'll know, they have real specialist skills. They've got trading, they've got the data science piece, which you've got, but they've also got that relationship with media owners as well, that really close, tight relationship. Is that something that you're going to be looking to replicate, or is that not your
well, we have
field?
fundamental, really, really strong relationships with the Googles, the Facebooks, etc. of this world. So, I think that it's pretty fundamental, and those are, huge global players. And obviously, to ignite marketing technology in that space is something that, we sort of lead in, because we are a technology powerhouse. So I think that the conversations have changed. Marketing automation is just gathering pace, and it's playing to our strengths quite nicely, particularly in the area of being able to harness data. I mean, we're now entering an era where you're going to have a cognitive layer on top of the technology. That's going to change everything, and artificial intelligence is here now, and it's completely changing the game in terms of content distribution and personalization at scale. So those are all the things that clients need, not only want but need. And I do believe that a player like Accenture, can answer those problems.
Okay.
Let me, if it's okay, on scale,
sure.
because I think challenges for Accenture, scale can mean breadth, but it doesn't always mean depth. And one of the challenges we have, and this is where the two play an interesting roles, Mediacom sits with all of our local markets, sits with 3 or 4 different lines of business, and LVM, I saw there are different lines of business. There's no replacement for understanding that. There is no replacement for knowing the different levels of marketing within your markets. So in China, perhaps very high, US very high, but when you get down to Vietnam and some of these others. So one of the challenges with scale is it may go across very wide and can do very wide things, but this is where media sits with our local markets every day, and understanding how to take that and really delve it into the line of business, or perhaps the limitations that a market may have, is critical as part of that also.
Yeah, that's great. Mark, that's really interesting. I mean, one of the things that, when I started out in my career, that I was always coached in, was that agency management was very, very important. And you had to think about your agency as a partner, as almost an extension of your own marketing department. And yet, when I read a lot of these articles at the moment about trust issues, it feels like it's almost become more confrontational, at least the way it plays out in the trade press. Do you see that sort of the intervention of procurement departments and budgetary pressures from CEOs are damaging that partnership relationship that you have with clients, or is it as strong as it's always been?
I think it's as strong as it's always been. I think that the trade press, that's an industry in decline, if we want to talk about one, and they need to find things to write about. Now, a lot of the issues they're writing about are absolutely issues, but we absolutely welcome working with procurement departments. We welcome working with auditing companies. Because we believe we do a good job, and having that verified independently is great. And a lot of the questions in the industry that the trade press are writing about absolutely should be questions, but I don't think that there is this fundamental huge breakdown of trust. Sure, there are questions, and they're the right questions, but certainly with the vast majority of our clients, I feel like our relationships are never stronger because they can see the value that we bring. And, it's interesting, yes, companies want to go on digital transformations, and yes, that involves looking at infrastructure investments, and it involves much bigger macro decisions about the business. But it also involves empowering and enabling the people that are making decisions. And if you look at any large organisation, they've got hundreds or thousands of marketers across the world in every country. And they're part of that journey as well. So they're also looking to us to how can we help train those people, to upskill those people. And as you mentioned, the scale and the relationships we've got. Nikki's mentioned Facebook and Google, but it's not always Facebook and Google, and it's often working with knowing which of the online retailers in Japan that are going to count, because it's certainly not Facebook and Google. It's knowing about Chongqing TV and Hunan Weisha and Ali in China. It's not Facebook and Google.
And I guess that's what I was alluding to about, you guys have got people on the ground, they've been doing this a long time, they have the local relationships, but you must feel a little bit under threat because there has been disintermediation. I mean, Chris sort of touched upon it a little bit, but I mean, I've been a client for a long time. We've never had more people ringing us up, offering us things.
Yeah.
Frankly, that puts us in a good negotiation position. So surely you must, as one of the biggest expense lines on our budgets, be feeling a little bit under threat.
Well, we're not the biggest expense line. Your media investment is.
Yes.
Certainly your agency fees
are pretty high.
No, it's not. It's a challenge. It's a challenge, and all industries are constantly evolving. If anyone in this room who thinks that they're just going to sit still and have the same business model in 3 years that they've got now, will have a smaller business, I'm sure. And that's the same for us. So yes, there's competition. There's always been competition, and we see that that's a challenge for us to continually evolve our service offering. One of the previous speakers, Mitch from Mars, I mean, some of the stuff we've been working on with Mars over the last 18 months has been a global program to help with their digital transformation, where we've brought in, trying to help them embrace a culture of test and learn and to create that brave culture that Mitch was talking about, by getting their marketers to submit business issues and for us to look for technology solutions that can lead to experiments. Now, that's a test and learn environment, and so far in the last year we've done about 30 experiments around the world that are looking at things like using social feeds and search in Russia to understand when people have got a new puppy or a new kitten, to target them with pet care messages. Now that's, these are really interesting things that we're doing that are enabling the Mars marketing departments to embrace digital and go on a transformation. So as long as we keep evolving and adding value as our service, I think we've got a very bright future.
Interesting. And who doesn't like a puppy or a kitten?
Absolutely.
Nikki, I mean, you're in a sort of privileged position in a way, because of course you worked at O&D for a long time, you had a very senior role there, so you understand how the holding companies work. Now you're at Accenture. I know you have to be quite diplomatic here, but what do you observe, having worked on both sides, what do you observe as being the key differences in what the two players bring to the table, and what made you decide to go to Accenture out of interest?
Yeah, I think it goes back to what I said before in terms of, business transformation, marketing transformation being fundamentally linked to business transformation. I felt like I wanted to have bigger conversations with clients. Clients were already asking me to solve big problems at Omnicom, but I felt I couldn't harness the right assets and capabilities and the right talent to be able to, fire it properly at the problem. So I think that now I see that we have, the huge scale, amazing talent. There isn't a resource issue. We're not, I think because we're a technology powerhouse, we don't do things manually that we can automate.
Right.
We've practically automated a hell of a lot. So it frees up our people to actually be more brilliant and more creative. I also think that the scale and the success that we bring to clients also is very well kind of remunerated and compensated. Therefore, we can invest back into the business. I mean, Mark was talking about talent. We spend $1 billion on training. That's a lot of money.
Yeah,
so,
is.
you know,
It's
we would take it really,
amount.
really seriously,
Okay.
and that's obviously across the world. So I do, yeah, the scale, the investment in people, the technology, because it was a huge frustration sometimes that I was doing things manually, or that my teams were, you know, spending 4 hours to do a task that should take 20 minutes. So, you know, that's all eradicated when you work for a player like Accenture. You know, you do work long hours, but you're working on solving really, really big, painful problems for clients.
That's really interesting. I'm looking forward to the days when you guys will have aerials coming out the top of your heads.
It'll happen.
It'll happen. It'll happen. That was amazing, that presentation yesterday. Chris, I'm going to come back to you. These guys, they work for agencies or they work for consultancies. Let's be honest, they bullshit for a living, as do we all. But we work in marketing, come on. Are you buying this? I mean, how do you see things panning out? Do you think in 5 years' time, the relationships that you have had traditionally with agencies, consultancies, vendors are going to look like they do today, or do you think they're going to be radically different?
No, I think they'll be radically different. The only thing I can predict is that it will be different. Can't tell you exactly how, but I think it'll be different. But I look at it as a couple things. I think the benefit that Accenture has today is, and Nikki talked about this, is because you're at a C-suite level, the questions you get asked and the problems you get solved are very strategic questions. And if I look at Mediacom, who's asked the problems that get solved are basically briefs, and briefs basically say, I want to win Cannes Award. So the level of difference in terms of what Accenture perhaps gets as the real business issue on a very C-suite level versus a local market are so different. And I think they'll continue at different levels because of that. But I also think what will change for us organizationally in Accenture has the ability to do this versus perhaps a media agency is, if you look at it, what happens with our organization is there are other groups that are starting to have gray areas or demarcation. Great example, CRM today sits in loyalty, but the question is, should that be sitting in media? I think somebody like Accenture can come in that a media or even myself cannot do, is to be able to say, look at your structure, you may have to move this group over here, you may have to move this group over here, or combine those. And I think when you look at what we do at Accenture, they are in some of our different areas well beyond media. They have much more of the capabilities where media will sit at that space. But I think that nobody can be an expert at everything. So when you look at what we expect from Mediacom, and Marcus sort of talked about this, or any media agency, more strategic, more planning analytics, more data analytics, data driven by understanding a problem versus data for data's sake. I think that's a role they'll continue to play on that. And obviously with the creative and media having to work together, I don't know how, I know that Accenture and some of these guys are building that piece, so it'll be interesting of where that falls in the future. But I think where you see some of the media agency and some of the creative agency, I think media is now helping define creative, but I think we also have to take a step back and make sure there is creative in our creative and not dictating length for platform or anything like that. So the questions that in the next 5 years I think media will get more strategic from a media standpoint, but I think there will be higher level business questions from an Accenture that we'll have to look at as part of that also.
And it's Shell, if you don't mind me asking, have you looked at bringing any stuff in-house? I mean, we heard yesterday from Lego about how they feel by bringing some of their campaign activity in-house, they can get end-to-end ownership of the data, they can get speed, they can get agility. There's often a feeling that agencies have become a bit bureaucratic and a bit slower, certainly, than some of the more progressive clients. Is that something you're finding?
We are. The way I would say it is, I think Gerhard did a great job yesterday of the difference between ownership and control. So what we're looking at is when you look at bringing things in-house, I would say there's 4 boxes if you look at somebody like a Google. 1 is your agency owns everything. 2 is you own the data, but all media services go through that. 3 would be you share media services, and 4 is you take everything. I think there's certain industries, if you look at the travel industry, an example, or even some retailers where they're in that lower area. For our ability just to take it in-house, and I think the things with our verification IAS or even Google, the questions we ask now are questions that we probably wouldn't have got from Mediacom, because we're seeing something, and because of that, it stirs something different. And I think sometimes the challenge for the media agencies is how do you, like us, how do you show the good stuff and almost hide the bad stuff. And so our questions become more strategic because they're the business side of the equation. That doesn't make sense because my consumer's over here in my segmentation. Why is that happening? And so I think the ability to have control of your data is a big piece we are starting to do a little bit more now,
really
rather than always rely on it. But I don't think we'll go full ownership the way some of the bigger companies have ever done. And I struggle a little bit because of the people you have to have and the structure you have to have. Shell, I don't know how you could have creative people when Shell is Shell. So it's really tricky in that area.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Now, our time is up. My guests have been absolutely brilliant, and thank you so much for all of your time and thoughts today. Very quickly, have any of you guys out in the audience got any questions whilst we have these titans of our industry up here, or do you all need cigarettes and coffee? Any questions from the audience? Let me see, let me see. Oh, question over here. The microphone coming over to you.
Yeah, I have a question to Nikki, because I'm not sure if I understand this correctly, but you seem to be only talking about digital media when it's about Accenture. Do you also look at entering into more traditional media and taking over part of what media agencies would be doing?
I think we're interested, we'll look at it from a point of marketing activation. So what do we need in a global marketing activation network? And we're working backwards from there. Obviously, we're starting with digital and then working out what's next. But in terms of, we know that programmatic TV is a thing. We know that the majority of media will be traded programmatically probably by 2025. So, that's the starting point. We're just looking at it from a different lens and starting with digital.
Brilliant. Thanks, Nikki. One quick question anywhere? Anyone else? Can I see any hands? One over here? No? I feel like an auctioneer looking for bids. All right, brilliant. Well, thank you so much, guys, and thank you, audience. Brilliant job. I'll see you all later, everyone. Thanks, guys.